This conference will now be recorded.
Greetings, everyone. Once again, the weeks fly by. I don't know about you. It's hard to believe that we're into session 11 of Brothers in Arms. Here it is past the middle of March, 1/4 of the way almost through another year. And as we get older, time goes more quickly. There was a saying, I go to the gym, take these group classes, and in a few of the classes, majority of the people are even older than me, in their mid to late 70s into their 80s. And one of them told me one time, interesting, they probably got it from someone else. I think it's kind of a common phrase. But as you get older, especially if you don't have hobbies, if you don't go to the gym, if you don't have yard work to do, if you're not preparing sermons and lessons for a church, and so you don't wake up every day with something pretty big you need to accomplish. Uh, one of the sayings I hear from people like that is the days go slow, but the years go fast. And it's kind of an interesting thing that, if you don't have anything important to do for day after day after day, the day can just drag on. You're kind of trying to think of something to do. Steve and I have not reached that point yet. We have more on our plate, longer lists to take care of, more irons in the fire. As Mike Maney says, though, he says, I have a lot of irons in the fire, but I haven't branded any cows yet. So we remain pretty active, and I like that. I hope that continues for a number of years. Our Brothers in Arms text verse is Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. So we're enjoying, as brothers in the flesh and brothers in the spirit, going through our church's daily and weekly Bible readings, and we're trying to take that last week's reading and go a little bit deeper into parts of it. One problem is that a week's reading is often about 20 chapters, and so there are of necessity things left off, things we would like to get into, but we're trying to keep these sessions to about an hour. Being a pastor, I get too wordy sometimes, and so that takes up a lot of the time. Steve has to fight his way into getting some of his own thoughts in some of these sessions. But our week's reading this week for the church is let's just call it the first 20 chapters of the book of Deuteronomy. And so we'll try to make some comments on those chapters. The good thing about it is Deuteronomy is long enough that we'll have another session to pick up maybe some of the things we don't get to today. But the book of Deuteronomy is a great book. It's the last of the first 5 books of the Bible grouped together that we call the Torah, the Pentateuch, the 5 books, the writings of Moses, as he brought them in their mind, at least, all the way from original creation to the time they were ready to cross over the Jordan under Joshua. And so this book of Deuteronomy, that's the Greek name, or we would call it the English name for the book Deuteronomy, which is simply 2 Greek words together that means the second giving of the law. And, the setting is 40 years after they came out of Egypt, and the first generation had died off. And we don't know if that first generation, because they died off because of lack of faith, how faithful or diligent were they to teach all these things to their children and grandchildren. And so the Lord, through Moses, wanted to make sure that the generation going into the land was well aware of all of the commandments of God. And so he rehearses the laws. We call it the second giving of the law, but it encompasses a lot more than that. I've often called the book of Deuteronomy Exodus in New Testament language, because it seems to highlight things, principles, or phrasing maybe that are often found in the New Testament. I think Deuteronomy probably influenced the style of speaking and writing of the Apostle Paul very much. It seemed like he was very fond of the book of Deuteronomy, as he should have been. And the Hebrew name for Deuteronomy is very simple. It's called Devarim, which simply is the plural word for words. And it's just from the very first verse of the first chapter. These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on this side of the Jordan in the wilderness. So that's where they get their title, is the words of Moses. And he's summarizing a lot of the teachings of the previous few books, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and preparing them to cross the Jordan River and possess the land, fighting the battles we find in the book of Joshua. Before I go any further, though, into some things in the first 20 chapters, Steve's going to talk a little bit about the idea of God replacing Moses and why and who and some of those details. So go ahead, Steve.
Back in Leviticus, we didn't have time to talk about last week. Moses has been told to go up to the top of the mountain. You can see the land. You're not going to go in. You're going to die soon. And he's going to die in about a month. And Moses' desire in 27, starting at 15,
is that which
for
book was
replacement. That would be Leviticus.
Or Numbers? Leviticus?
Numbers. Excuse me.
Oh, I thought you
no
meant
Numbers.
Okay.
Numbers. I'm sorry. Yeah, misspoke. Numbers 27, 15. That he says, starting. I guess I'll start with verse 16. Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, who may go out before them and go in before them, who may lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep who have no shepherd. So there we get a clear indication that Moses desired a replacement similar to himself, who had been like a shepherd to the people, a person God had used to guide them. Verse 18, and the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun with you. And here's what God says about Joshua, and that's important, not what we have a take on Joshua and we love him and appreciate him. But the Lord said, he's a man in whom is the Spirit. So that's pretty awesome statement from God about Joshua. And lay your hand on him. Set him before Eleazar the priest and before the congregation, and inaugurate him in their sight. So there's some key points there, that this isn't done in a little small ceremony. This is going to be your replacement, and you're going to do that with Eleazar the high priest. You're going to invite all the leaders of the congregation, and they're going to come and see and witness this inauguration with their own eyes. So again, some very important points when we read what that really entails. And you shall give him some of your authority, that all the congregations of children of Israel may be obedient. So Moses did that. He laid his hands on him and inaugurated him. But I wanted to think about connecting a thought back when we were in Genesis, the 49th chapter, and Jacob blessing his children and prophesying about their future. When it comes down to Joseph, Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim. By extension, that would be from the tribe of Joseph. And let's see what Jacob says about Joseph in 49. 49:22, Joseph, you're a fruitful bough by the well, His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in his strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. So that's talking about Joseph. But it goes on to say, from there is a shepherd, the stone of Israel. Well, we know that can apply to Christ, and probably should apply that to Christ, who Isaiah lays out as the foundation stone, the stone of Zion, the tried stone, the precious cornerstone, all those things that Isaiah says about prophesying about the Lord. But remember, this is Jacob talking about Joseph. Joseph definitely was a type of Christ. And out of your loins, out of the loins through your son Ephraim, will come another shepherd. I think I could easily consider this is actually talking about Joshua. That out of your loins will come another shepherd that will guide the Lord's sheep as a shepherd does his sheep, and that he would be a keeper of the sheep. Anyway, that was a thought I considered when I was thinking about Joshua being from Ephraim and the connection of Jacob and the blessing and the prophecy, considering Joseph and through his son Ephraim. And so I think there's some connection there that you consider. Have you thought about that before?
Yeah, that's a good point. As you were talking, one thought I had was, why did God choose Joshua to be the next leader instead of Caleb? The points you make, I think, explains it. But in another way of thinking, you'd think it might be Caleb, because being from the tribe of Judah, that's the kingly tribe or the leadership tribe. Both Judah and Joseph or Ephraim are the birthright blessing tribes, sons. So it could have been either. Judah being the more kingly line, and Caleb in many ways. Joshua was a great man, and he proved to be the right leader. Of course, God always knows what he's doing. But along the way, Joshua needed some growth. He questioned things a few times. He didn't seem to understand the setting a few times. When Moses was on the mountain and Joshua was down waiting for him, and they heard the noise of the golden calf, Joshua thought it was a sound of war. And Moses right away knew, no, it's something different. There was a few instances like that where Joshua didn't quite have the insight yet that Moses had. But not only did he grow under the leadership of Moses, but God gave him the spirit to understand once God had selected him. So God made sure that Joshua was the right leader. But I guess I was thinking a little bit on a larger scale even. It could be argued that Caleb, in some ways, may have been the braver, more courageous, willing to speak up quicker. Like in Numbers 13, when the spies came back, it was Caleb who said, "We can go. Let's go in right away. We can do it. God's with us." So it seemed like Caleb was kind of the leader there in trying to convince the people to go ahead and go in even more than Joshua was. But it's a kind of a principle that we find through the Bible that speaks about God selecting who he wants, even if someone else might seem to be their equal or even more than their equal. Caleb, in so many ways, was the equal of Joshua. And, when he said, "Give me this mountain," when they were in the land taking his land territory, he was 85 years old, and yet he was still willing to fight the giants. So there's just a lot about Caleb that inspires us in ways that even Joshua, it's not revealed quite as dramatically as it is with Caleb. But God
Mhm.
chose Joshua, and of course he chose correctly. But I'm even thinking about, moving forward. In many ways, Jonathan had qualities about him that was as good as David, and in some ways maybe better, because being the king's son, he would have been trained from birth to be the next king. And so he would have had the background and the training and the position, the bloodline, and everything. And yet, when it became obvious that God chose David, Jonathan showed what a godly man he was by not fighting against it, accepting it, even promoting it. And I think Caleb probably did the same thing. Uh, we're not really told, but in what you read in Numbers, when God selected Joshua, I think Caleb probably was the happiest man around. Not that he didn't want it, but that he recognized that God selected Joshua, and Caleb accepted it completely, just like Jonathan did, and just like Barnabas in the New Testament. Barnabas had the earliest training, the deepest training from the start. He was part of the early church long before Saul of Tarsus. And in their first missionary journey, he seemed to be the leader. He was the one who went and got Paul up in Tarsus and brought him down to Antioch. So Barnabas was the respected leader among the early church. And yet, when it became evident that it was going to be Paul that was going to be the leading apostle, they had a little dust up there at the end of Acts 15. Uh, but Barnabas maintained his godly spirit, and he recognized Paul as the one that God had chosen for that special calling. And it shows us that uh, God always chooses right, of course, but it shows us when God chooses someone different than us to take a particular role in a leadership position instead of us. Caleb, Jonathan, and Barnabas are the example of how to handle that properly and to even rejoice in it, and to realize that God knows what he's doing better than I do. And none of them were lifted up in their pride and saying, I deserve it. I'm a better man. None of them did that. We have other examples in First Kings, like of uh, David's, well, even before that with Absalom and stuff, but David's sons all physically and carnally uh, trying to become the next king instead of accepting God's choice of Solomon. So we have examples of the good and the bad of how
Mhm.
to handle God's choice of leadership. And so you just kind of open that door for me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, my thought, an extension would be that maybe Joshua had more of the spirit of his ancestor father of Joseph, to where he would have almost be an intercessor or a provider, where Caleb may have not have been so tender towards some of their failings, and Joshua would be more of a shepherd type, and Caleb may be more of a lion from the tribe of Judah type. Um, that was these are some of my thoughts anyway.
Good. Okay, we get into the first chapters of Deuteronomy, and of course, it's reviewing some things of their desert years, and uh, some of the great sermons I've ever heard came from the book of Deuteronomy growing up. I remember one time at a fellowship meeting, Brother Richard Harless Sr., the first, our pastor growing up, preached from Deuteronomy 2:3, and the old King James says, ye have compassed this mountain long enough, turn ye northward. He just used that to preach one of these inspiring, powerful messages about we've been just kind of um, not making any progress. It's time that we headed northward to the promises, and he really challenged us to get up and start moving forward with the Lord. And some of these Old Testament books just have so many great what we call diving board or springboard verses, where you can read the verse and it has kind of an inspiring thought, and you can use it to form a message from. But we get to it's hard to pick out what you would vote to be the best chapters or your favorite chapters in the book of Deuteronomy, but I think chapter 6 and 7 would probably be the favorite of most people. It's so packed full of good stuff. And chapter 6:23 is gives that principle that we like to bring up so often. Then he brought us out from there that he might bring us in to give us the land of which he swore to our fathers. And that's the principle behind what we believe the Bible to teach about our Christian life, is that salvation is not just a bringing out from something terrible, but a bringing into something wonderful. And so that kind of grabs hold of so much what the New Testament teaches, but especially we think about the Shema, it's called. It's just a Hebrew word for to listen or to hear. So much of what Deuteronomy and the rest of the Bible talks about is God just wants us to listen to him. But the Shema, which is still repeated among those of the Jewish religion today, in Deuteronomy 6 and 4 is where it begins. But they actually quote more than that. But it starts off with saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." So the very, very, very deep truth of what we call monotheism, there is only one true God, that separated Israel from most every other nation who held to many gods, would have many idols and all sorts of evil practices connected to those. God is saying, there's only one God, it's me, and you need to listen to me. And that kind of boils down so much of the Bible, is that there is a God, and it's not me, and it's not any other God. It's the God of Israel, the God of heaven, the creator God, and I need to pay attention to him. And that word Shema, used often in the Old Testament, translated as listen or to hear, uh, it it means more than just hearing. We hear things all day long, and a lot of times we say it goes in one ear and out the other, so it doesn't find a place to settle down and produce anything. But that word Shema carries the idea of to hear with a heart's desire to put it into practice, to really meditate on it, think about it, try to put it into practice. There's a word used often in the Bible, especially Old Testament, usually about God toward us, but also about us toward God. It's the word incline. Incline your ear. And Steve and I really understand that word now at our age, because both of us have pretty severe hearing problems. And so, especially if we're in a crowded room, there's other voices and sounds going on, and someone's trying to talk to us. It's pretty embarrassing for me. I don't notice Steve doing as much as me, but sometimes I lean over almost to the point where I'm hugging them or embracing them, sticking my ear right up to their face so I can hear what they're trying to say. And that idea of bending down low to hear is certainly true about God. I love that picture of God as if he's sitting on his throne, but he's bending down low to listen to us, because he is interested in what we have to say in our prayers. He's interested in blessing us. He's inclining his ear toward us. And the word Shema kind of captures that idea of bending down low, or up in this case, to God, turning our head or good ear upward to listen to what God has to say, with the desire to put it into practice. So that idea of Shema is really important in chapter 6. And I'm sure Steve has some things to say about this, but when you get over to chapter 18, verses 15 through 19, and that's that great passage where God tells Moses tells the people, God will raise up a prophet like unto me, and you will hear him, you will listen to him. And that verse can be kind of puzzling because we know that that was fulfilled in the first coming of Christ. But the puzzling part is the people really did not listen to him completely. Individuals did, but the nation, they heard what he had to say, but they did not incline their ear to him. So that when he said on the Mount of Transfiguration, this is my beloved son, hear him, that's kind of like a repeat in the New Testament of the Shema. It's like the Father is saying, he is the Shema now. He is the voice that you need to listen to. And they did not hear him in humble obedience. But he is coming again. And at his second coming, they will incline their ear to him. They will be regenerated as a nation. And they will be saved. They will be brought back into a bridal relationship. There, even romantically, we have verses like Hosea 2 and 14 that says, I will allure you. I will speak romantically to you uh, of a bridegroom that is uh, trying to impress on the one he wants to marry, to listen to him and to follow him and become his bride. Zechariah 10:8 even says, I will whistle for you. The idea that a man wants to get the attention of a pretty woman, he whistles at her. And we think that's kind of crude today, but he's wanting to get their attention, is the idea. He's wanting them to listen to what he has to say. And first he has to get their attention. So that's that idea of whistle. And the Hebrew writer gives us a real big warning in Hebrews 12:25. If they refused him who spoke from heaven, see, that's the history of Israel. They refused him who spoke from heaven. They thought they were listening. You know, they said in Exodus 19, when God first started speaking to them from Mount Sinai, and Moses repeated to the people said, all that he says we will do. You know, they were basically saying, we are listening, we are inclining our ear, but they really did not, proven by their lack of faith and obedience. And there's a wonderful psalm. I'll just say this before I close this thought of the Shema. Uh, there's a Psalm 81 is the one I'm thinking of, where it kind of summarizes this whole idea of God desiring that they would pay attention to his words to the point they practice it. His desire to them in Psalm 81. Uh, I'll start in verse 8. Psalm 81:8. Hear, O my people, and I will admonish you. O Israel, if you will listen to me. So, you know, this late in the game, hundreds and hundreds of years later, he's still urging them, if you would just listen to me. And we say that to our kids. You know, we tell them to do something, they act like they're not paying attention. We sometimes say, you better listen to me, or did you hear what I had to say? Well, of course they heard. What you really mean is you need to pay attention to the point of obeying what I say. And that's kind of all built into this idea. He says in verse 9, there shall be no foreign God among you, nor shall you worship any foreign God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide and I will fill it. That is one of the most beautiful visual descriptions of God's overall desire for his people. Is I will be able to fill you up as wide as you are able to open your mouth. I can supply even beyond that. And Paul uses a lot of that kind of language, like Ephesians 3, abundantly above all that we ask or think. is the same idea as this. But the problem is verse 11. But my people would not heed my voice. See, it's not just hearing it, it's heeding it. And Israel would have none of me. So I gave them over to their own stubborn heart to walk in their own counsel. And here's God almost crying out in sadness. Oh, that my people would listen to me, that Israel would walk in my ways. And he goes on to tell what he would do if they just listened to him. And so how important it is for us today to really pay attention to what God is trying to tell us and to try to put it into practice. And that makes all the difference. You know, someone we love today, if it's a close friend or a mate, a child, a parent, someone that we truly love, when they speak to us, we'll stop everything and listen to them and really try to soak in what they're trying to say. But if we don't really love them very deeply, we'll just kind of listen passively, kind of ignore a lot of what they're saying or reject it or not really take it to heart. And I guess that's what all I'm trying to say is the idea of hearing God means taking it to heart and trying to put it into practice. So that's the Shema. Okay, Steve, sorry I went on and on about that.
No, that's good. Really good stuff. A lot of good thoughts and a lot of good connections. And I'm sure you have more. When I was thinking about chapter 6 anyway, I just wrote in my notes real quickly. If I was summing up much of the heart of the book of Deuteronomy, I would probably say go read chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
And chapter 6 pretty much covers the rest of the book pretty much is just expanding on that whole thought about loving the Lord, following his will. In the book of Deuteronomy only covers about a 1 month period, the last month of Moses' life. And you mentioned before the kind of the urgency maybe that he felt in writing this last little piece and how important it was, just like he was burdened and desired God to provide a good replacement for him. Kind of an urgent request by him. These last writings of Moses, there was a sense of urgency. What should I write? I really want to get to the heart of the matter. I really want to speak to them. And he spoke to them. I think this is important for us to carry over to our time. He rehearsed. So the book of remembrance can be said or referred to when you're thinking about the book of Deuteronomy 2. It could easily be called the book of remembrance. Moses is reminding them what they've done, what God has provided, how God has provided for them, what he is doing for them, what he will do for them. But Moses didn't leave out the judgments of God either. So he's providing for them the statutes and judgments of the terms of the covenant. Terms of the covenant. There are terms of that covenant that God had made with them that they agreed to. And Moses is reminding them of that. So it kind of reminded me of, you said Paul grabs a lot of the writings of Moses, and maybe especially Deuteronomy. Romans 11:22, Paul reminds them to consider the goodness and the severity of God. In order to have a proper understanding of God and who he is, you can't just try to grasp the goodness. God is love, and leave out that God is also a righteous judge. It takes both to have a proper understanding of God. And, a lot of the writings of Paul, he spent expanding on that and declaring that and giving Old Testament examples of that. Paul sometimes even quoting, often quoting things that Moses said about that subject. So just kind of wanted to connect those dots at this point. But again, kind of the urgency, because Moses is going away. He's now speaking to a new generation. That original declaration of the laws and statutes and judgments of God was given at the foot of Mount Sinai to their fathers. Their fathers were now dead. And Moses is wanting to tell them and remind them and rehearse before them before his departure. And, so he goes into that whole thing in chapter 6 about the frontlets of your eyes when you lay down in the morning, when you get up, when you lay down at night, when you get up in the morning, key phrases like key words like it needs to be in your heart. It needs to be part of your talk. It needs to be on your house. It needs to be bound as a sign on your hand. It needs to be on the front of your eyes. All those things you can read into almost the sense of urgency of what can I pen and put together and leave these people that I won't be able to say not many days moving forward, would be my thought.
That's good. Another important thing about chapter 6 and 7, so interesting that right after he pronounces the Shema of paying attention to God in verse 4 of chapter 6, the immediate follow-up statement is the first great commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. So if you love the Lord and he is in your heart and he is your main desire, then you'll listen to him. And if you're not listening to him, that's a sign of a coldness of love that is not there. The other thing I would bring up is how often some form of verse 5 of the first great commandment, it kind of surprised me again. Every time I read through Deuteronomy, it kind of surprises me. How many times so far, just in the first 20 chapters, does he mention this idea of loving the Lord with all your heart? So that is the heart of the Bible, really, is to love the Lord with all your heart. And when you do, you'll listen to him. You'll read the Bible. You'll listen to people talking about the Bible. You'll think about it. As it says here in chapter 6, you'll teach it to your children. You'll write it on your doorposts, frontlets of your eyes. And as I've often said through the years, that little portion in verse 7 through 9 of chapter 6, the side benefit of following all of that, of doing all of that, is God was creating an educated society. That if you're learning to write it, you're learning to write. If you're memorizing it, you're exercising your brain. If you're teaching it to your children, you're exercising your ability to speak wisely and properly. He's building an educated society on every level that they could then transfer to other parts of their life, because hardly any society in the world through most of history could read and write like we think of today. Yeah, God was instilling that as kind of a side benefit in doing what he said here, and that it would benefit them in many other ways besides their spiritual life, that they were better educated than any other nation around them, which would then lend itself to thinking of ways better to do things like agriculture and building furniture, even, and building houses, and how to raise better quality animals. I mean, there's the side benefit of God producing in them a higher intellect, meant that it would improve every part of their life. So it wasn't just for the spiritual benefit, it was for their benefit overall. Then the other thing I would say in chapter 7, especially verse 6, For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. This really feeds into one of my main crusades in life of teaching the Bible, is that let the Old Testament form the foundation of your thinking in your New Testament studies. That is just so important. And the particular subject I'm thinking about is the subject of election. People who believe that God chose individuals to be saved, and those he did not choose could have no possibility of salvation. Calvinism, we call it. Almost always park out in the New Testament and use particular verses, Ephesians 1, especially Romans 9 through 11, other places, to try to prove that belief system. But if you let the Old Testament form the foundation of election before you go into the New Testament, you'll understand from chapters like this that election is a corporate matter, not a personal matter. God is choosing a nation for himself, and individuals within that nation have the freedom to choose to be part of the truly elect, we might say, who are really listening to the Lord and following the first great commandment to love him with all their heart, or those who reject it, both within the nation of Israel, or what John the Baptist and Jesus called, when they came, the wheat and the chaff. And the wheat and the chaff were always within the nation of Israel. But they were all blood Israelites, but some truly lived up to that election of being a holy nation, and some did not. And as the book of Deuteronomy closes out, maybe we'll deal with this a little more next session. He said, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. Choose life. They had a choice as individuals. But his overall elective plan was to have a set apart or a holy nation. And it really is formed around a very beautiful, important Hebrew word, segula, Segullah, that is that translated in chapter 7 and verse 6, a special treasure. And he uses this idea of a special treasure here. He uses it in chapter 14, verse 2. He uses it several times in the book of Deuteronomy. He had already used it back in Exodus 19 and 5, back at Mount Sinai 40 years earlier, when he entered into that marriage contract with them. And they agreed to the terms of that marriage contract, even though they did not live up to it. But he said in 19 and 5, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, there's that idea of this, of the Shema again. The idea of listening means to obey, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure. There's that segula to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. The word segula is a Hebrew word, but it carried a more secular meaning outside of their relationship with God. It meant, a king had all kinds of treasure. Usually a king was a man of great wealth and power. But the word segula meant his special treasure above all his other treasures, that which meant even more to him than everything else. And that's what God is saying. God loves the whole world. Christ died for the whole world, but he chose a nation that he wanted to be a separated nation from the other nations. But by doing that, they were not separated in the sense of isolated. Separated does not mean isolated. He wanted them to interact with the other nations, to be a witness to the other nations, so people of the other nations could come in to believe in the same God that they loved and served. So separation does not mean isolation. Even today, we are in the world. We're not of the world, but we are in the world. And we're to be light and salt and so forth. That word segula, as we close out the entire Old Testament, is that word used in Malachi 3 and 17. where he says, "They shall be mine, says the Lord of hosts, on the day that I make them my jewels." And that word jewels there is the word segula, translated my special treasure, back in Deuteronomy and Exodus. And then the New Testament writers, because they are grounded in the Old Testament, as they should have been, pick up on this same idea for the church. Titus 2:14. It's not the Hebrew, it's the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew word. And Paul writes to Titus there, Titus 2:14, who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself his own special people. The old King James likes peculiar people, but his own special people. Paul is just bringing over into the New Testament that segula idea of a special treasure. And again, it's a corporate election here in Titus 2:14. He's talking about the church. He's talking about his corporate people that he elected to be his ambassadors, his representatives in the world today. And then in 1 Peter 2:9, verse we like so well, but you are a chosen generation. That word chosen always brings up the idea of election. You are an elect race, a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, kings and priests, a holy nation, a nation, this idea of corporate election. I can't emphasize that enough. And if we let the Old Testament form the principle to bring over into the New Testament, we would be less likely to make election about personal choosing unto salvation. We would make it about him choosing a people, a corporate group of which individuals have the choice to be a part of or not. I like what Brother Worski, the example he used to use about election. He said election means that the airline has chosen a particular plane is going to fly from one point to another, and that plane will get there because that's the election of the company. But the individual passengers have a choice of whether to get on that plane or not. That's a real simple way of explaining that, but it really paints a picture that I think is accurate. Then he says in 2:9 of 1 Peter, his own special people, or Old King James, a peculiar people. So it's so interesting that the New Testament writers are picking up on the language of Moses in Exodus and Deuteronomy and using the same ideas, the same wording, same particular meaning. Why? Because it's the same olive tree all the way through. Israel and the church, the same olive tree, the same language applied to both. And anyway, that's how I look at the Bible, and I think it's the correct way, and I think it helps explain a lot of things. So again, a lot of words here. What do you have? How do you have to respond to that?
A lot of important connections there, because I was thinking that how many times it seems like, at least in religion today, that there's a mindset that the God of the Old Testament was a different God. And like in the New Testament, he repented and became something else. He became a softer God. And yet, how many of the New Testament writers just keep going and grabbing the principles, the precepts, the statutes, the laws that are in the Old Testament, given especially in the first five books. So it's just it's very sensible to me to come to a conclusion that the New Testament writers didn't see some hard stop and change in direction in God's desire to have a people that would serve him. And those people are corporate people. And as examples that you've given a few different ways, and that's, it's up to you to get on that plane. And if not, you better be careful about claiming those promises of the corporate if you're not part of the corporate.
Mm-hmm. I bring up one little thought here, and then I think you have something to say about warfare and the danger of prosperity. A few things as we start to work toward the close of this, but there's a little passage in chapter 9 And I just read maybe one or two verses there. But in chapter 9, verse 4 through 7 is the entire passage. But he says in verse 7, remember. Boy, that's what you said. It's a book of remembrance. Deuteronomy 9, verse 7. Remember, do not forget. How often does the Bible say versions of all of that? Do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness. From the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place, you have rebelled against the Lord. There was a certain rebellious spirit in Israel that remained in them all through their history to the time of Christ. It never quite left them. They got close once in a while, or for a very temporary short space. Days of Hezekiah, the days of Josiah, even the days of David, Solomon at the first. But they couldn't keep it. It never seemed like it lasts because the underlying spirit that seemed to never leave them was the spirit of rebellion. And that's what he says in verse 24, chapter 9. You have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you. So I bring that up for one reason for people to consider as they're studying Matthew 24, where Jesus said in verse 30, for all these things shall come upon this generation. Many people read that thinking, well, he's talking about a period of 40 years or 70 years. And that's what many people use to say that 40 years later, 70 AD, Titus and the Romans destroyed the city, temple. And that's what Jesus was talking about, so that all these things would come to pass within a literal generation of time. Others say, no, that's the generation that's living at the very end when all of these things truly are coming to pass, because there's a lot more in Matthew 24 than maybe what happened in those next 40 years. So people argue about what this generation means. But there's another possibility, and the reason I read these verses is that it could be talking about until that rebellious spirit within my people Israel is removed for good, then these things are not all going to come to pass. And that rebellious spirit will not be removed completely from them until the return of Christ. And for 1,000 years, many Old Testament verses teach that they will be a loving, obedient people to Christ, a truly holy nation for the first time, not just an elect holy group within the larger nation, but the whole nation shall be a holy nation unto him. What he wanted all along will finally come to pass. They will be renewed to bridal relationship, and they will be blessed for 1,000 years. And then one other thing, and I'll turn it over to you for what you want to say in closing, is some of the chapters we read regarding how to deal with your neighbors and how to deal with slaves and a lot of those kind of things. It really, not only in chapter 6, they follow those verses 7 through 11 and so forth, would they become an educated, very intellectual nation as a whole, but they would become a very generous nation. Uh, it talks about reaching out your hand, giving to them, not expecting anything in return, taking care of the poor and the widows and the fatherless. They were to be a very generous nation. And even that, if they would have done that to the other nations, to those who came into contact with them in their travels and so forth, they would have gained a reputation of being a very kind and generous nation instead of what they became, those who tried to hold everything tight to themselves and not sharing it with the other nations. So this idea of a generous spirit God was trying to develop within the nation. What do
Yeah,
you
he
have
even did
about?
that.
Go ahead.
Well, he even did that by Moses instructing them from God that every third year you have a special tithe to give to the poor and the widow in order that they may eat and prosper. So, it was trying to, again, generate within them a generous spirit. And here's a good way to do it. Um, but as many do, and maybe we all do at times, maybe they didn't develop that spirit, but they saw that as some type of command. Okay, it's the third year, I got to lay aside a tithe for the poor, because the spirit of that law would be, and I shouldn't only do that the third year. I should have my head on a swivel and pay attention to the poor around me, and especially if they're from the household, our tribe, that I need to take care of them, just not every third year, but develop a certain character in me to where I want to help often. So anyway,
And
that was
maybe one thing I'd add
point in the
to
14.
maybe one thing I'd add to that is, again, this idea of the New Testament writers being so immersed in the Old Testament principles and teachings, is that this is very much what James talked about in his book. I mean, he took a good part of his book to talk about pure and undefiled religion before God is to visit orphans and widows in their trouble. And then, of course, in chapter 2, about the faith without works is dead. But if you see your brother naked and destitute and without food, and you say, well, I'll pray for you, but you don't do anything to help them, can you really say you're a Christian? So he's drawing those kinds of things from what Moses is talking about here in Deuteronomy, of a generous spirit. So anyway, you have some things to bring up before we close out.
Well, just a few. You talked about springboard verses and thoughts. A couple things I just wanted to share. Chapter 12, not to go over it extensively, but you brought messages. I've heard some very, very good, timely messages about seeking the place the Lord has put his name, the place that he inhabits in chapter 12, not wherever you choose by yourself. So it's a very serious thing to consider, chapter 12, to not sacrifice, not give your offerings in your own place, in a place that you have chosen for yourself, but a place that I put my name. So that would be definitely a springboard thought, and some verses for a message or a lesson about making sure we're serving at a place that has the Lord's name on it, a place that he inhabits, is the thought of chapter 12. Again, we can talk about that one for a long time. So a few more thoughts. When you get a king in chapter 17, so when you come into the land and you desire a king, 17 verse 14 and 15, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. So we'll probably talk about that a little bit more when we get to the kings, and King Saul and then King David and so forth. Make sure it's a king that the Lord chooses among your brethren. But an extension from that thought in verse 18 of chapter 17 is, when you do get a king, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, the instruction is that he shall write for himself a copy of this law of the book. So the king, whoever that king is that the Lord sets over you, he is to personally write, or at least oversee the writing of a copy of the book of the law, in order that he may know it inside and out, in order that he may rule with righteous principles, with principles that are aligned to the Word of God. I liked reading that again and reminding myself of that. And what a great thing for the Lord to set up, that a king would rule knowing inside and out, because he had to pen it or he had to supervise the penning of it himself. You got any thoughts on that one?
Well, other than also to show that the type of government God was setting up was a theocracy, meaning God was their true king. And so by the king doing this, he was acknowledging to all the people that I might be king, but there's a king above me. And I am obligated to obey the same king that you are. It was partly intended to keep the king humble. And as we will get into the kings, we'll see that many of them did not take that to heart.
Yeah, my last thought was on the law of warfare in chapter 20. it appears that Moses instructs them that if they come up against a city that is not part of the promised inheritance, so that is not. So outside the boundaries of what they are supposed to subdue, and they come up against a city, they're supposed to first offer peace to that city. I like seeing that it not just an annihilation outside the borders, that it means something with inside the borders, and that if they refuse that offer of peace, then you have the right, or actually the law of killing all the males, and the rest is your bounty. But it makes a difference when you come in to conquer the land inside the borders or inside the inheritance that the Lord is giving you. You leave nothing alive that has breath. That's in 20 verse 16. Nothing alive that has breath. You totally annihilate. So the Lord is making a difference. He's given an opportunity for those that are not in the inherited land to make peace and to be not slaves, but be servants of the people of God, and the people of God would then are instructed in various other passages how to treat that servant, to treat them well. So they had an opportunity for that. But there are reasons, and we'll get into it more when we get into the book of Joshua, why God told them to destroy the people of the land of Canaan, the evilness of the people that had extended for enough years, and God was telling them to destroy those people who have not taken any opportunity to repent and change their ways. So that was just a few thoughts that I had.
Yeah, that's good.
My part.
That's good. Yeah. Any nation who followed those principles, I mean, what other nations treated their slaves, servants, hired servants, or whatever, as well as God told Israel to? How many treated their wives, their female, their family structure, their everything, their generous spirit? He was creating an elevated society, a better society on every level. And other nations, if they had really paid attention, and if Israel had really put this into practice the way God desired, Israel could have been the model nation, not just spiritually, but financially, agriculturally, family-wise, all of their relationships with people within their nation. Other nations could have imitated that and become better, and as they did, they would be more open to receiving the message of the true God, as they saw that the God of Israel's way works on levels that we haven't yet given our allegiance to him, but we're following the practices of his nation, and it's making us better. So we may as well go in all the way and make him our God. So the benefits could have been on so many levels, and God was designing such a perfect society as far as humanly possible with our limits. But it never quite achieved that level. But as I like to say, it will in the millennial. They will be the model literal nation on the earth for 1,000 years, and other nations will stand in awe of what a nation can be like, literally, if they follow God's ways. And that will be part of the witness to the whole earth, that the God of Israel is the true God of everyone and needs to be obeyed and listened to and followed. And it'll be a great thing. That's why one reason the millennial is going to be so great. It's just going to be an ongoing testimony that God was right all along. All this boring Old Testament stuff, as a lot of people look at it, during the millennial, people are going to say, hey, you know that verse in Deuteronomy? God was right all along. Look how well that works. It's going to be, I think that kind of thing is going to happen and be said all through those 1,000 years. Anyway, we
Yeah,
have,
the essence, just my closing thought real quick would be the essence of the law. We kind of the thought in chapter 10 in verse 12 and 13. I'll just read 13. And to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command you today. And then the last statement is for your good. This is for your good. And, that would kind of sum up the essence of God's principles and his statutes that he laid out. They're for your good. And as you already mentioned, they would have been good for the nations around them, for the society around them. And everybody would have improved their status and their life and their peace, opportunities at peace, their livelihood, their prosperity, just by living out these principles.
good place to stop. So this is session number 11. We hope we said some things that stirred some good thoughts in you. And one burden I have through the sermons that I post and through these lessons and other things that end up getting posted on YouTube is that we're living in a time now where many churches are without pastors, or even if they have a pastor, they don't have qualified men to like teach adult Sunday school and so forth. So the pastor's trying to do it all. And we want to give you permission, not that it's better than what it would be if you had your own teacher, but we give you permission if like during your adult Sunday school times, especially maybe next year, if you decide to read through the Bible in chronological order, like we're doing in these lessons, we would love for you to use these sessions every week in your adult Sunday school after you've read through during the week and be able to follow along with us. So however you want to use these is fine with us. We're just putting it out there, hoping it benefits somebody along the way. So that's the end of this session, and we look forward to finishing Deuteronomy next session. There's still a lot more to say, and I'm going to have a hard time not spending all of my time in chapter 32, the concluding Song of Moses, because that's one of the great chapters of the whole Bible. We'll try to do our best to give more than that, and hope that this session was a blessing to you. God bless everyone.